The October rain drummed steadily against the window of the small apartment in Nashville, Tennessee. Jake Morrison, 34 years old, sat in his worn wheelchair, staring at the yellowed envelope on the coffee table. Inside it lay his last savings, $250 he had scraped together, penny by penny over 6 months. The one-bedroom apartment reflected his precarious financial situation. Peeling paint on the walls, furniture donated by the local church, and a refrigerator that worked when it felt like it. But there, on the main wall, carefully hung, was his most precious treasure. An autographed poster of Garth Brooks that he had bought years before, being deployed to Afghanistan. Jake ran his hand through his brown hair, now showing premature gray streaks that hadn't been there before the war. His wife Sarah was at work at the diner downtown, pulling double shifts to keep their family afloat. Their 3-year-old daughter Emma was napping in the bedroom, blissfully unaware of the financial storm clouds gathering over their small family. The wheelchair had been his constant companion for 2 years now, ever since the IED explosion that had claimed both his legs below the knee and ended his military career. The prosthetics sat unused in the corner. Too expensive to maintain properly, too painful to wear for long periods without the right fittings. Jake's phone buzzed with a text message. His buddy Marcus Williams from his old unit had sent him a link. Garth Brooks announces surprise intimate show in Nashville. 1 night only. Jake's heart raced as he read the details. The Ryman Auditorium, October 28th. Tickets starting at $200. His hands trembled slightly as he stared at the screen. Garth Brooks, the man whose music had literally kept him sane during those endless nights in Afghanistan, whose songs had played through his headphones during the worst firefights, whose voice had been the soundtrack to letters he'd written home to Sarah. "Daddy?" Emma's small voice came from the bedroom doorway. She padded over in her worn pajamas, her blonde curls messy from her nap. "Why are you crying?" Jake quickly wiped his eyes, not realizing tears had started falling. "I'm not crying, sweetheart. Just thinking about something important." Emma climbed onto his lap with the practiced ease of a child accustomed to her father's disability. She had never known him any other way, and her innocent acceptance of his condition often broke his heart in the most beautiful way. "Tell me a story, Daddy." Jake held her close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. Once upon a time, there was a soldier who was very far from home. As he told Emma a sanitized version of his deployment, his mind wandered to those nights in the forward operating base. The oppressive heat, the constant tension, the fear that gnawed at everyone's gut. But then someone would put on Garth's music, and for a few minutes they could all pretend they were back home. Friends in Low Places had become their unofficial anthem, sung badly but enthusiastically around campfires made from empty ammunition boxes. The front door opened, and Sarah walked in, her waitress uniform wrinkled from a long day. At 32, she still carried herself with the grace that had first caught Jake's attention in high school, but the stress lines around her eyes told the story of their struggles. "Hey, baby," she said, kissing the top of his head before scooping Emma up. "How was your day?" "Mommy?" Daddy was looking at his phone and got all sad, Emma announced with the brutal honesty of a 3-year-old. Sarah's expression immediately shifted to concern. "Jake? What's wrong?" He showed her the phone screen. Sarah's face went through a series of emotions: excitement, understanding, then the harsh reality of their financial situation. "Oh, honey," she said softly. "I know we can't afford it," Jake said quickly. "I know we need that money for Emma's daycare and the electric bill. I know it's selfish to even think about it." Sarah sat down on the arm of his wheelchair, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Jake Morrison, you have never been selfish a day in your life. You gave your legs for this country. You deserve to have something good. But the money is ours to decide how to spend? Sarah interrupted firmly. When's the last time you did something for yourself? When's the last time I saw you really smile? Jake couldn't remember. The depression had been a constant companion since his injury, made worse by the chronic pain and the feeling of helplessness that came with being unable to provide for his family the way he once could. I used to listen to his music every night over there, Jake said quietly. When the mortars were falling, when we lost guys, when I thought I'd never see you and Emma again, his voice was like a lifeline back to everything that mattered. Sarah knelt beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. Then we're getting that ticket. Sarah, no, we can't. Yes, we can. And we will. Her voice carried the same determination that had gotten her through his deployment, his injury, and every challenge since. My mom can watch Emma. I'll pick up an extra shift this weekend. We'll make it work. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Jake and Sarah sat at their small kitchen table with the laptop between them. The Ticketmaster page loaded slowly on their outdated computer, and Jake's heart sank as he saw most sections were already sold out, or beyond their budget. There, Sarah pointed at the screen. Upper balcony, section 10. $230 after fees. Jake stared at the screen. $20 left over wouldn't cover much, but it would be enough for gas to get to the show and maybe a small dinner beforehand. Are you absolutely sure about this? He asked one more time. Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. Jake, you saved 3 of your buddies when that IED went off. You crawled 50 yards on your belly with 2 blown-off legs to get them to safety. You've never asked for a medal, never complained, never felt sorry for yourself except on the really bad days. If anyone deserves to see their hero perform, it's you. With shaking hands, Jake clicked Purchase. The confirmation email arrived moments later. October 28th, 8 p.m. The Ryman Auditorium. Seat U1015. As they prepared for bed, Jake rolled his wheelchair to the window and looked out at the Nashville skyline. Somewhere out there, Garth Brooks was probably in a recording studio or his home, unaware that a broken soldier had just spent his last dollars for the chance to hear him sing. Thank you, Jake whispered to Sarah as she helped him transfer to their bed. For what? For believing I'm worth it. Sarah kissed his forehead. You're worth everything, Jake Morrison. Don't you ever forget that. That night, for the first time in months, Jake fell asleep without the usual nightmares. Instead, he dreamed of music and lights and a voice that had carried him through the darkest period of his life. The days leading up to the concert crawled by with agonizing slowness. Jake found himself checking and rechecking the ticket confirmation email, terrified it might disappear. He researched everything he could about the upcoming show, setlist predictions, photos of the Ryman's interior, even the wheelchair accessibility information. 3 days before the concert, while Sarah was at work and Emma was at daycare, Jake made a decision. He rolled his wheelchair to the small closet where they kept their craft supplies, mostly Emma's crayons and construction paper. But buried beneath the children's art materials, he found what he was looking for: a piece of white poster board left over from a school project Sarah had done in her night classes. Jake spread the poster board on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. What could he possibly say that would matter? How do you condense years of gratitude into a few words on a sign? He picked up a black marker and began to write in careful block letters. Garth, your music saved my life in Afghanistan. Thank you. Jake, US Army veteran. He set the marker down and studied his handiwork. The letters were slightly uneven, His hands weren't as steady as they used to be, but the message was clear, simple, honest. When Sarah came home that evening, she found Jake in the living room with the sign propped against the wall. "Oh, Jake," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's perfect." "You think he'll see it? I'll be pretty far up in the balcony." "If he's half the man his music makes him seem to be, he'll see it," Sarah assured him. The morning of October 28th dawned gray and drizzly, typical Nashville fall weather. Jake woke before his alarm, his stomach churning with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. He hadn't been to a large public event since his injury, and the prospect of navigating crowds in his wheelchair was daunting. Sarah had arranged to leave work early, and her mother, Linda Patterson, had driven down from Clarksville to watch Emma for the evening. Linda was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had initially been skeptical of Jake when he and Sarah first started dating in high school. But his military service and the way he treated her daughter had won her over completely. "You boys have a wonderful time," Linda said, hugging Jake goodbye. She had started calling Sarah and Jake "you boys" after his injury, claiming it made her feel like she had two daughters to look after. "We will, Mom," Sarah promised. "Emma's bedtime is 8:30, and there's leftover mac and cheese in the fridge." Jake had dressed carefully for the occasion. His best jeans, a button-down shirt Sarah had ironed for him, and his Army baseball cap. The sign was rolled up in a tube attached to his wheelchair, along with a small bag containing water bottles and the sandwiches Sarah had packed. The drive to downtown Nashville took 30 minutes through the afternoon traffic. Jake's hands grew sweaty as they approached the Ryman, the mother church of country music. The historic building stood majestically on Fifth Avenue, its red brick facade and stained glass windows giving it the appearance of an actual church, which it had been over a century ago. "Parking's going to be a nightmare," Sarah muttered, circling the blocks around the venue. They finally found a spot 6 blocks away. Sarah had brought Jake's lightweight manual wheelchair for the evening, easier to maneuver through crowds than his heavy electric chair. The transfer from the car was always awkward and slightly embarrassing for Jake, but Sarah handled it with practiced efficiency. "You okay?" she asked as she adjusted the footrests. "Yeah, just nervous." "About the show?" "About everything. What if I have a panic attack? What if the crowds are too much? What if—" "Jake." Sarah knelt beside his chair, her face level with his. "You survived 13 months in a war zone. You can handle a country music concert." The walk to the Ryman was longer than expected, and Jake's shoulders burned from propelling the wheelchair over the uneven sidewalks. His military-issue gloves, worn thin from years of use, provided little cushioning for his hands. As they approached the venue, the crowd grew thicker. Jake felt the familiar tightness in his chest that signaled the beginning of a panic attack. Too many people, too much noise, too many potential threats to assess. His training kicked in automatically, his eyes scanning for exits, for cover, for danger that logically wasn't there, but felt overwhelming nonetheless. "Sarah," he said quietly, his breathing becoming shallow. She immediately moved behind his wheelchair, her hands resting on his shoulders. "I'm right here. Focus on my voice. You're safe. We're in Nashville, not Afghanistan. These are country music fans, not insurgents." A large man in a cowboy hat noticed Jake's distress and immediately created space around them. "Hey, folks, let's give our veteran some room here," he called out. The crowd parted naturally, and several people nodded respectfully at Jake's army cap. "Thank you for your service, son," an elderly woman said as they passed. "My grandson served in Iraq." The simple acknowledgement helped ground Jake back in the present. By the time they reached the entrance, his breathing had normalized. The Ryman's interior took Jake's breath away. The wooden pews, the stained glass, the intimate atmosphere. It felt sacred in a way that had nothing to do with religion and everything to do with music history. Countless legends had stood on this stage. Hank Williams, Patsy Cline, Johnny Cash, and of course, Garth Brooks himself. Their seats were indeed in the upper balcony, but Jake realized immediately that upper at the Ryman wasn't like upper at a modern arena. The venue was small and intimate. No seat was really a bad seat. From their position, Jake could see the entire stage clearly. And more importantly, he felt confident that if he held up his sign at the right moment, Garth might actually see it. Sarah helped him transfer from his wheelchair to the theater seat, folding the chair and storing it in the designated space at the end of their row. Around them, the audience was a mix of ages and backgrounds, but all united by their love for the man they'd come to see. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage, Garth Brooks. The crowd erupted as the lights dimmed, and a figure emerged from the shadows at the back of the stage. Even from their elevated position, Jake could see the energy radiating from the performer as he grabbed his guitar and approached the microphone. Nashville. Garth's voice boomed through the venue. How we doing tonight? The answering roar was deafening. Jake found himself clapping and cheering with an enthusiasm he hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long time, he forgot about his wheelchair, his pain, his financial troubles. He was just a fan watching his hero perform. Garth launched into Callin' Baton Rouge, and the entire audience sang along. Jake's voice cracked with emotion as he joined in, remembering all the times he'd sung this same song with his unit around their makeshift campfires. 3 songs in, during a brief pause between numbers, Jake made his decision. His hands trembling slightly, he unrolled his sign and held it up high. From their position in the balcony, it was impossible to know if Garth could see the individual words, but Jake held the sign steady, pouring every ounce of gratitude he'd felt over the years into that simple gesture. What happened next would be talked about for years to come. Garth Brooks had performed thousands of concerts in his career, but there was something special about playing the Ryman. The venue's intimate atmosphere and rich history brought out the best in every performer who was blessed enough to take its stage. As he finished The Dance, one of his most beloved ballads, he took a moment to scan the audience, making eye contact with fans in different sections as he always did. That's when he saw it. In the upper balcony, a man in an Army baseball cap was holding up a handmade sign. From the stage, Garth couldn't make out all the words, but he could see enough. Garth and Afghanistan and Veteran. The man holding the sign had tears streaming down his face, and beside him sat a woman who was clearly his wife, her hand supportively on his shoulder. Garth had always made it a point to acknowledge military personnel at his concerts, but something about this particular moment struck him differently. Maybe it was the obvious emotion on the veteran's face, or the simple, heartfelt nature of the handmade sign, or just the fact that this man had climbed up to the highest, cheapest seats in the house, but was still there, still supporting, still believing in the power of music. "Hold on just a minute, folks," Garth said into the microphone, setting his guitar on its stand. The audience quieted, sensing something special was about to happen. "I see a sign up there in the balcony," Garth continued, shielding his eyes with his hand as he looked up toward Jake's section. "Sir, in the Army cap, would you mind standing up?" Jake's heart nearly stopped. Sarah gasped beside him. Around them, the other audience members began to turn and look, trying to spot the person Garth was addressing. I can't stand," Jake called out, his voice barely audible in the large venue. Garth cupped his ear. "What's that, son?" One of the audience members near Jake, a man named Robert Chen, who had served in the Navy, stood up and called down to the stage. He says he can't stand Garth. He's in a wheelchair. The entire venue fell silent. Garth stood perfectly still for a moment, processing this information. Then he did something that no one expected. "Well then, would you mind if I came up there to you?" The audience erupted in cheers and applause. Jake sat in stunned silence as Garth Brooks handed his wireless microphone to a sound technician and began walking off the stage, heading toward the stairs that led up to the balcony. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, gripping Jake's hand. "Oh my God, Jake, he's coming up here." Security personnel scrambled to keep up with Garth as he climbed the narrow stairs of the historic venue. The audience craned their necks to follow his progress, many holding up their phones to record what was clearly going to be an unforgettable moment. It took several minutes for Garth to navigate through the venue and climb to the upper balcony. During this time, the audience remained unusually quiet, as if collectively holding their breath. Jake used the time to try to compose himself, but his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold onto his sign. "I can't believe this is happening," he kept repeating to Sarah. "Believe it," she replied, her own voice choked with emotion. "You deserve this, Jake. You deserve every bit of this." When Garth finally appeared at the top of the balcony stairs, the crowd erupted again. He made his way through the narrow row of seats, stopping to shake hands and acknowledge other fans along the way. But his focus was clearly on reaching Jake. "Are you Jake?" Garth asked as he reached their seats, slightly out of breath from the climb. "Yes, sir," Jake managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Garth knelt down beside Jake's wheelchair, bringing himself to eye level. "Can I see that sign?" With trembling hands, Jake handed over the poster board. Garth read it carefully, his expression growing more serious with each word. "Your music saved my life in Afghanistan," Garth read aloud, though his voice wasn't projected to the rest of the venue. "Tell me about that, Jake." Jake struggled to find words. "We used to listen to your songs over there. When things got really bad. When we lost friends. When I thought I might not make it home to my wife and daughter. Your music reminded us what we were fighting for." Garth's eyes glistened with tears. "Where were you stationed?" "Forward Operating Base Chapman, sir. Coast Province. I was there for 13 months before—" Jake gestured toward his legs. "IED?" Jake nodded. "Lost both legs below the knee. But I got my guys out first. That's what mattered." Garth stood up and turned to address the entire venue, his voice carrying clearly through the space without amplification. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet Jake Morrison. Sergeant Jake Morrison, United States Army. He served 13 months in Afghanistan and lost both his legs saving his fellow soldiers." The entire venue rose in a thunderous standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. Jake sat overwhelmed, tears streaming down his face, as 2,300 people applauded his service and sacrifice. When the applause finally died down, Garth knelt beside Jake again. "Jake, I have a request for you." "Anything," Jake replied. "Would you mind coming down to the stage with me? I'd like to sing a song for you, and I think the folks down there would like to meet you properly." Jake looked at Sarah, panic in his eyes. "I don't know if I can. The wheelchair, the crowds." "We'll figure it out," Garth said simply. "I've got the best crew in the business. They'll take good care of you." Sarah squeezed Jake's hand. "Go," she said. "This is your moment." "Will you come with me?" Jake asked her. "Try and stop me," Sarah replied with a smile. What followed was a carefully orchestrated movement of Jake, his wheelchair, Sarah, and Garth through the venue. Security cleared a path, and the audience remained respectfully quiet as they made their way down to the stage level. Several venue staff members assisted with navigating the wheelchair down the stairs, and through the narrow backstage corridors. When they emerged onto the stage, the crowd erupted once again. Jake found himself in his wheelchair at center stage, Sarah standing beside him, with Garth Brooks and his full band arranged around them. "Folks," Garth said into his microphone, "I've been doing this for a long time, and I've met a lot of heroes. But I want you to know that sitting right here is one of the bravest men I've ever had the privilege to meet." He turned to Jake. "What was your favorite song over there, son?" Without hesitation, Jake replied, "Friends in Low Places." Garth grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that." As the familiar opening chords filled the venue, something magical happened. Jake Morrison, the broken veteran who had spent his last $230 to hear his hero sing, began to sing along. His voice, cracked with emotion but strong with conviction, joined Garth's in the opening lines. But they weren't alone. Every single person in the Ryman Auditorium began to sing, creating a chorus of 2,300 voices united in song. The sound was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. More powerful than any weapon, more healing than any medicine, more unifying than any speech. As they reached the chorus, Garth stepped back and let Jake take the lead on a line. For a brief, shining moment, Jake Morrison wasn't a disabled veteran struggling to make ends meet. He was a performer on the stage of the Mother Church of Country Music, singing his heart out while thousands of people sang with him. When the song ended, the ovation was deafening. But Garth wasn't finished. "Jake," he said, "I want you to know that your service and sacrifice mean everything to folks like me who get to live free because of what you and your brothers and sisters in uniform do every day. But I also want you to know that your story, your strength, your example, that means something too." He paused, looking out at the audience. "How many of y'all think Jake here is an inspiration?" The answering roar shook the historic building. "That's what I thought," Garth smiled. "Jake, I want to give you something." Garth Brooks walked over to his guitar stand and picked up his main acoustic guitar, a well-worn Martin D28 that had been with him through countless concerts and recording sessions. The instrument bore the scuffs and marks of years of use, each imperfection telling a story of songs written, crowds entertained, and hearts touched. "Jake," Garth said, returning to where Jake sat in his wheelchair, "this guitar has been with me for over 20 years. It's been on stages all over the world, and it's helped me share music with millions of people. But I can't think of anyone who deserves to have it more than you." The crowd fell silent as Garth knelt down and placed the guitar across Jake's lap. "Now, I don't know if you play." "I used to," Jake said quietly, his hands trembling as he touched the polished wood. "Before I got deployed, I played a little. Haven't touched one since I got back." "Well, maybe it's time to start again," Garth suggested gently. Jake ran his fingers over the strings, and despite not having played in years, muscle memory kicked in. He strummed a simple G chord, and the sound that emerged from the guitar was rich and pure, resonating through the venue's perfect acoustics. "There you go," Garth encouraged. "You've still got it." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as she watched her husband hold the guitar. She hadn't seen him look this alive, this hopeful, in years. The weight of depression and helplessness that had settled on his shoulders seemed to lift, if only for this moment. But Garth wasn't finished. He turned to address the audience again. "Folks, I've got an idea, but I'm going to need your help. Jake here served our country with honor, and now he's facing some challenges that a lot of our veterans face when they come home. I think it's time we showed him what the country music family is all about." He gestured to his band, and they began playing a soft instrumental version of Unanswered Prayers, one of Garth's most beloved songs about how sometimes what we think we need isn't what we actually need. Jake, would you mind telling everyone a little bit about your situation at home? Your family? Jake looked uncertain, but Sarah nodded encouragingly. He took a deep breath and spoke into the microphone Garth offered him. My wife Sarah works double shifts at a diner to support us and our 3-year-old daughter Emma, Jake began, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. I can't work like I used to. The prosthetics are expensive and the pain is, well, it's hard some days. We live in a small apartment and honestly, I spent our last savings to be here tonight. The venue was completely silent except for the gentle guitar melody. But it was worth it, Jake continued, looking at Garth. Because music, your music, reminded me that there's still beauty in the world, that there's still hope. Garth nodded slowly. Sarah, would you come over here, please? Sarah approached hesitantly, still overwhelmed by the surreal nature of the situation. Sarah, tell us about Jake. What kind of man is he? Sarah took the microphone, her voice steady despite her emotions. Jake is the strongest person I know. He saved 3 of his buddies when that bomb went off, crawling 50 yards on his belly with 2 destroyed legs to get them to safety. He never complains, even on the days when the pain is so bad he can barely get out of bed. He reads to our daughter every night, helps her with her coloring books, even when his hands are shaking from the medications. He's a hero, but more than that, he's a good man who deserves better than what life has dealt him. The audience was completely captivated. Many were openly crying, moved by the raw honesty of the moment. Garth took the microphone back. Folks, I've learned something over the years. Music has power. The power to heal, to inspire, to bring people together. But sometimes, it takes more than just a song. Sometimes, it takes a community. He walked to the front of the stage. I'm going to do something I've never done before in my career. I'm going to ask you to open your hearts and your wallets for one of our own. From his pocket, he pulled out his phone. I've got the contact information for a friend of mine who runs a non-profit for wounded veterans. By tomorrow morning, we're going to set up a fund specifically for Jake and Sarah Morrison and their little girl, Emma. The crowd began to cheer, but Garth held up his hand. But here's the thing. I don't want this to be about charity. Jake isn't looking for a handout. He's looking for a hand up. Jake, what would you do if you had the resources? What's your dream? Jake thought for a moment, overwhelmed by the question. I used to want to be a music teacher. Before the Army, I was studying music education at Middle Tennessee State. I thought maybe someday I could teach kids, share the gift that music has given me. Garth's face lit up. Now we're talking. Folks, what if we could help Jake finish his education? What if we could help him get the equipment he needs, the prosthetics that would let him stand in front of a classroom? What if we could help him become the teacher he was meant to be? The response was immediate and overwhelming. People throughout the venue began standing and applauding, many shouting, "Yes!" and "Let's do it!" But the most unexpected response came from the audience itself. Robert Chen, the Navy veteran who had helped translate Jake's words earlier, stood up in his seat. Garth, Jake, can I say something? Garth nodded and gestured for Robert to continue. I'm a veteran too, and I work in tech here in Nashville. Jake, if you're serious about going back to school, I'd like to help. My company has internship programs for veterans, and we could work something out while you're finishing your education. Before Jake could respond, another voice called out, I'm a music teacher at Hendersonville Elementary. Jake, when you're ready, we could use a substitute teacher, and I'd be happy to mentor you. And then another, my husband owns a medical supply company. We can help with the prosthetics." What followed was unprecedented in the history of the Ryman Auditorium. Spontaneously, audience members began standing up and offering help. Contact information was shouted out, business cards were held up, and a genuine outpouring of support began to materialize in real time. Garth stood back and watched in amazement as his simple gesture sparked something much larger than he had anticipated. This wasn't just about helping one veteran anymore. It was about demonstrating the power of community, the strength that comes when people choose to lift each other up. Dr. Patricia Williams, a psychologist who specialized in PTSD treatment, stood up near the front of the venue. "Jake, I don't know if you're dealing with PTSD, but if you are, I'd like to offer my services. No charge. What you've been through, what you're dealing with, you don't have to face it alone." Jake was overwhelmed, unable to speak through his tears. Sarah had moved to stand behind his wheelchair, her hands on his shoulders, both of them stunned by the generosity pouring out from complete strangers. Garth returned to the microphone. "Folks, this is why I love country music fans. This is why I love America. This is what happens when good people decide to act." He knelt down beside Jake one more time. "Son, I started tonight thinking I was just going to play some songs for folks. But you've reminded me, all of us, what this is really about. It's about taking care of each other. It's about making sure that heroes like you don't fall through the cracks." Jake finally found his voice. "I don't know what to say. I don't know how to thank everyone." "You don't have to thank us," Garth replied. "You've already given more than enough. You served, you sacrificed, you survived. Now it's our turn to serve you." The rest of the concert was unlike anything anyone had ever experienced. Garth continued his set, but every song seemed to take on new meaning in light of what had just happened. During "The River," he invited Jake to play along on the guitar, and Jake's simple chord progression added a haunting beauty to the familiar song. When Garth performed "Standing Outside the Fire," the entire audience sang along with unusual intensity, the words about taking chances and living life fully resonating with everyone who had witnessed Jake's courage. But it was the final song of the evening that truly captured the magic of what had occurred. As Garth began the opening notes of "Amazing Grace," performed in the style that had made it one of his signature songs, something extraordinary happened. Jake, still holding the guitar Garth had given him, began to play along. His voice, rusty from disuse, but rich with emotion, joined Garth's in the timeless hymn. And then, one by one, every person in the venue began to sing. The sound of 2,300 voices singing "Amazing Grace" in the Mother Church of country music was transcendent. It was a moment that seemed to lift everyone present above their earthly concerns and connect them to something larger than themselves. When the song ended, the silence that followed was profound. It was the silence of a shared spiritual experience, of a community that had been transformed by witnessing authentic love and generosity in action. Finally, Garth spoke into his microphone one last time. "Jake Morrison, you came here tonight with a simple sign thanking me for my music. But you've given all of us something much more valuable. You've reminded us what it means to be human, what it means to care for each other, what it means to be a community." He paused, looking out at the transformed audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we can all agree this was Jake's show tonight. We were just lucky enough to be here for it." The standing ovation that followed lasted for nearly 10 minutes, but it wasn't just for Garth Brooks. It was for Jake Morrison, for Sarah, for every veteran who had served, and for the power of human kindness that had transformed an ordinary concert into something extraordinary. As the applause finally died down, Venue staff carefully helped Jake and Sarah navigate back through the venue. But the evening was far from over. Backstage, a line of people had formed. Audience members who wanted to meet Jake personally, to offer their help, to share their own stories of military service or family members who had served. Robert Chen was among the first to approach, business card in hand. "Jake, I meant what I said about the internship opportunity. Here's my contact information. Call me tomorrow. We'll figure out how to make this work." Dr. Patricia Williams was next. "I've been treating veterans with PTSD for 15 years. I know this evening has been overwhelming, but when you're ready to talk, I'm here." The music teacher from Hendersonville Elementary, whose name was Jennifer Walsh, had tears in her eyes as she approached. "My father served in Vietnam. He came home different, and we never had the resources to help him the way he needed. Jake, I would be honored to help you become the teacher you're meant to be." One after another, people approached with genuine offers of help. A physical therapist who specialized in amputee rehabilitation. A contractor who volunteered to do accessibility modifications to their apartment at no charge. A local bank manager who offered financial counseling services. Even teenagers who had been at the concert with their parents approached, asking if they could help with fundraising efforts. Sarah found herself taking notes on her phone, trying to keep track of all the names and offers. The outpouring was so overwhelming that she worried they might not be able to follow up with everyone appropriately. Garth Brooks himself stayed backstage for over an hour, personally meeting with Jake and many of the volunteers who had stepped forward. He made phone calls to his publicist and manager, setting in motion the creation of the fund he had promised. "Jake," Garth said, as the evening finally wound down, "I want you to know that what happened tonight, that doesn't happen by accident. That happened because people saw something real in you, something authentic. Don't ever forget that you have value, that you matter, that your story needs to be told." As they prepared to leave, Garth pulled Sarah aside. "Take care of him. He's been through hell, but tonight showed me that he's got something special. The way he handled all this attention, the grace he showed, that's not something you can teach. That's character." "He's always been like this," Sarah replied. "Even before the injury, even during the worst times, he's always thought of others first. That's why I married him." The drive home was quiet, both Jake and Sarah processing what had just happened. The guitar sat carefully secured in the back seat, and Jake's wheelchair was folded in the trunk alongside a bag full of business cards and contact information. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked as they pulled into their apartment complex. "I don't know," Jake admitted. "It doesn't feel real. 6 hours ago, we were struggling to pay the electric bill, and now? Now you have a guitar worth more than our car, and about 50 people who want to help us start over," Sarah finished. They sat in the car for a moment, looking up at their modest apartment building. Tomorrow, their lives would begin to change in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But tonight, they were still just Jake and Sarah Morrison, a wounded veteran and his devoted wife, trying to make sense of an extraordinary evening. "Do you think I can really do it?" Jake asked. "Go back to school? Become a teacher? All of it?" Sarah reached over and took his hand. "Jake Morrison, tonight you sang on the stage of the Ryman Auditorium with Garth Brooks. You inspired 2,300 people to open their hearts and wallets. You handled more attention and pressure in 3 hours than most people deal with in a lifetime, and you did it with grace and humility. So yes, I think you can become a teacher. I think you can become anything you set your mind to." 3 months after that transformative night at the Ryman, Jake Morrison sat in a lecture hall at Middle Tennessee State University, his new prosthetic legs allowing him to stand comfortably as he listened to Professor David Martinez explain the fundamentals of music education theory. The advanced prosthetics, fitted properly with the help of donations from the fund that had grown beyond anyone's wildest expectations, had given Jake a mobility and confidence he hadn't felt since before his deployment. The Jake Morrison Veterans Education Fund, as it had come to be known, had raised over $300,000 in the 3 months since the concert. The story had been picked up by national news outlets, and donations had poured in from across the country. But more importantly, it had created a network of support that surrounded the Morrison family like a warm embrace. "Mr. Morrison," Professor Martinez called, bringing Jake's attention back to the present. "Since you have practical experience with how music can impact people in extreme circumstances, would you mind sharing your perspective on the psychological benefits of music education?" Jake stood up slowly, still getting used to the new prosthetics. The classroom of 25 students turned to look at him, their faces respectful and attentive. Word had spread quickly about the veteran who had returned to school after his encounter with Garth Brooks, and Jake had found that his story opened doors and hearts wherever he went. "Well," Jake began, his voice steady and confident in a way it hadn't been for years, "I think music does something that nothing else can do. It reaches parts of the human spirit that words alone can't touch. When I was deployed, we'd have these moments of terror, of loss, of complete despair. But then someone would start singing, or we'd put on a familiar song, and suddenly we remembered who we were, what we were fighting for, why we mattered." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "I think that's what we can give students through music education. Not just the technical skills, but the reminder that they have a voice, that they matter, that there's beauty in the world worth preserving and creating." The students listened intently, several taking notes. Jake had discovered that his unique perspective, combining military service, personal struggle, and his recent reminder of music's power, gave him insights that traditional students and even some professors found valuable. After class, Jake made his way across campus to the physical therapy clinic where he had been working part-time while completing his education. Robert Chen had made good on his promise of an internship, but it had evolved into something different than originally planned. Instead of working in tech, Jake had found himself drawn to helping other veterans navigate their own recovery journeys. The clinic, run by Dr. Amanda Foster, specialized in treating veterans with various physical and psychological injuries. Jake's role was officially listed as peer counselor, but in practice, he did everything from helping with physical therapy exercises to simply listening when other veterans needed someone who understood what they had been through. "Jake!" called out Marcus Thompson, a young Marine who had lost his right arm in Syria. "Ready for some guitar practice?" This had become one of Jake's favorite parts of the job. Using the guitar that Garth Brooks had given him, Jake had started informal music therapy sessions with other veterans. The instrument had become a tool for healing, not just for Jake, but for dozens of other wounded warriors who found solace in learning to play. "Absolutely," Jake replied, retrieving the guitar from his office. "How's that chord progression we worked on last week?" Marcus had been struggling with depression since his injury, feeling like his identity as a Marine was all he had ever been. But as he learned to play guitar with his remaining hand, he was discovering new parts of himself. "I've been practicing every day," Marcus said, settling into a chair. "My girlfriend says I'm driving her crazy, but in a good way." As Marcus worked through the fingering for Wonderwall, a song he had chosen because it reminded him of better times, Jake reflected on how much his life had changed. The physical improvements were obvious: the better prosthetics, the return to school, the steady income from his work at the clinic. But the psychological changes were even more profound. The depression that had plagued him since his injury hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had been joined by something stronger: purpose. Every day brought new opportunities to help other veterans, to share his story, to remind people that healing was possible. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Emma's school concert is tonight at 7. She's been practicing her solo all week. Jake smiled. Emma had started taking music lessons, inspired by watching her father's transformation. Her 3-year-old rendition of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star wasn't going to win any awards, but her enthusiasm and joy reminded Jake daily of why music mattered. "That's great, Marcus," Jake said, as the young Marine successfully completed the song. "You're really getting the hang of this." "It's weird," Marcus admitted. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. Now I'm learning guitar, I'm back in school part-time, and I actually look forward to waking up most days." "That's not weird at all," Jake assured him. "That's healing. That's what happens when you remember that you're more than what happened to you." After the session, Jake had one more stop to make before heading home. The Nashville Veterans Affairs Medical Center had invited him to speak to a group of newly injured veterans, and these talks had become a regular part of his routine. The conference room was filled with about 30 veterans in various stages of recovery. Some were in wheelchairs, others had visible amputations, and many bore the invisible wounds of PTSD and traumatic brain injury. Jake had been where each of them was now. Angry, scared, uncertain about the future. "Good afternoon, everyone," Jake began, standing at the front of the room. "My name is Jake Morrison, and 3 years ago, I was sitting in a room just like this one, wondering if my life was over." He told his story simply and honestly. The deployment, the injury, the struggles with depression and financial hardship, and that extraordinary night at the Ryman. But he spent most of his time talking about what had happened since. "The concert was amazing," Jake said, "but it was just one night. The real work started the next day, and it's still happening every day. Recovery isn't a destination you reach. It's a journey you choose to take, over and over again." A young soldier raised her hand. "Do you ever regret your service? Do you ever wish you hadn't deployed?" Jake had been asked this question many times, and his answer had evolved over the years. "I regret that good people died over there. I regret that my family had to go through the pain of my injury and recovery. But do I regret serving? No. And do I regret the person I've become because of what I went through? Absolutely not." He gestured to his prosthetic legs. "These aren't what I would have chosen, but they've taught me things I never would have learned otherwise. They've made me more compassionate, more grateful, more aware of what really matters in life." Another veteran asked, "How do you deal with the bad days? Because I still have a lot of bad days." "You have them," Jake replied simply. "You feel them, you acknowledge them, and then you decide what you're going to do next. Some days, the best you can do is just survive until tomorrow. That's okay. That's enough. And some days, you'll surprise yourself with how strong you are, how much you can help others, how much joy you can find in small moments." He pulled out his phone and showed them a picture from Emma's last birthday party. Jake on the floor playing guitar, while Emma danced around him, both of them laughing. "3 years ago, I couldn't imagine ever being truly happy again. But happiness isn't about going back to who you were before. It's about becoming who you're meant to be next." After the session, several veterans approached Jake individually. Some wanted information about the programs that had helped him. Others just wanted to shake hands with someone who had walked their path and emerged whole on the other side. One veteran, an older man named David Rodriguez, who had served in Iraq, pulled Jake aside. "I heard about what Garth Brooks did for you. That must have been incredible." "It was," Jake acknowledged. "But you know what? The most incredible part wasn't the guitar or the money or even the recognition. It was the reminder that people care, that community exists, that we don't have to face our struggles alone. David nodded thoughtfully. I've been isolated since I got back, pushing people away, thinking they couldn't understand. Some people can't understand, Jake said honestly. But some can, and some will try, even if they can't fully get it. The trick is letting them. That evening, Jake sat in the audience at Emma's preschool concert, watching his daughter stand on a small stage and sing her heart out. Sarah sat beside him, her hand in his, both of them beaming with pride at their little girl's performance. As Emma sang "You Are My Sunshine," Jake thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The pain hadn't disappeared, his legs still hurt some days, and the memories of war still visited him in dreams. But those experiences had been joined by so much more. Purpose, community, hope, and the daily miracle of watching his daughter grow up. After the concert, as they walked to their car, Emma skipped ahead while Jake and Sarah followed at a slower pace, accommodating his prosthetics, but no longer feeling limited by them. "Do you ever think about that night at the Ryman?" Sarah asked. "Every day," Jake replied, "but not the way I used to. At first, it felt like this magical thing that happened to someone else. Now I realize it was just the beginning. The real magic has been everything that came after." Sarah stopped walking and turned to face him. "I'm proud of you, Jake Morrison. Not for serving, not for surviving, but for choosing to thrive." Jake kissed his wife as Emma danced around them in the parking lot, singing off-key, but with perfect joy. Above them, the Nashville sky was clear and full of stars, and Jake Morrison, veteran, student, counselor, husband, and father, felt truly rich for the first time in his life. 6 months later, Jake would graduate with his teaching degree. He would go on to become a music teacher at Hendersonville Elementary, where he would touch the lives of hundreds of students over the years. He would continue his work with veterans, eventually founding a nonprofit organization that used music therapy to help wounded warriors heal. The guitar Garth Brooks gave him would never leave his side, traveling with him to classrooms, hospitals, and anywhere else music was needed to remind people of their worth and potential. But on this night, walking to his car with his family after his daughter's first concert, Jake Morrison was simply a man who had learned that sometimes the most beautiful music comes not from avoiding life's discord, but from finding harmony within it. The story of that night at the Ryman would be told and retold, inspiring other acts of kindness and reminding people of the power of community. But for Jake, the real story was this. Every sunrise was a chance to choose hope over despair, purpose over self-pity, and love over fear. And every day, he made that choice again.